One of these videos, I'm going to find a way to do like a setup that's like purely for my Dungeons and Dragons videos. Until then, enjoy like the multiple camera angles as I flail desperately to try to do some sort of interesting framing. Anyway, let's talk about setting up traveling encounters. Now, traveling encounters can be very frustrating. In fact, I hear that a lot of dungeon masters, for some reason, altogether skip traveling. They'll say like, oh, you need to go from this city to this city. It'll take 6 days to get there, and well, 6 days pass and you get there. They don't do any sort of interesting encounters because a lot of people think that every single day on the road has to be a great big battle. And it doesn't have to be that way. So today I'm going to walk you guys through how to set up a simple travel encounter, and then I'm going to show you guys an example encounter table that I created just for the purposes of doing this. And the great part is that you don't even have to create an encounter table, but I'll walk you guys through why I do recommend that you should.
Riser, double.
I take how much damage? Step one is going to be to determine the amount of time that the characters are going to be spent traveling. So this could be anywhere from 6 days, 5 days, 4 days, however many days it's going to take. You want to set that up. Now, if it's going to take less than, say, 2 days, then you might as well just skip the travel time. Be like, okay, 2 days kind of passed. Maybe you could be like, hey, what do you do on the first day? What do you do on the second day? You don't want to have to set up an entire encounter table for like 2 days, right? Or 3 days or whatever, right? But like more than 3 days is where you might want to start getting into the encounter. Recently, my players had to take a 4-day travel period to get to the capital of Breland, which I have a map up there on the wall that you can't really see out of frame. But they had to get to the capital of Breland, which is Rote. And in order to get to Rote, they had to travel 4 days from where they were. And so I set up an encounter with I set up an encounter table with 6 different possibilities, and they had to roll a d6 in order to figure out which one happened on which of the 4 days. We'll get to that in just a moment. But that is basically what I had to determine. I had to determine the amount of time they were traveling, and then I had to scale my encounter table to that. Basically, the way you want to do it is the encounter table wants to be something they can evenly roll on. So if they are traveling for 6 days, it's probably best to do 8 different possibilities for a D8. If they're traveling for 8 days, 10 different possibilities. If they're traveling for 10 days, a D12. And then once you start getting into like the 15, 20 day travels, unfortunately, when it comes to like travels that go beyond, say, I would honestly say like 10 days, you probably are going to have to be a little bit more picky with the way that you set it up. But this video is more for simplistic travel, and it's also mostly for land travel. There is things like sea travel and air travel that you can apply a lot of the things I'm going to talk about today to, but those are a lot more complicated subjects, and I'll probably dedicate their own videos to them for things like that. Next up, what you want to do is you want to determine the area and likely enemies and encounters that the players can come against. So you want to say, are they traveling through a mountain top? Are they traveling through a mountain range? Are they traveling through a snowy area? Are they traveling through a foresty area? Are they traveling through plains? Look at the region that they're traveling in and look at the common enemies. All setting supplements in Dungeons and Dragons do have the type of terrain that is available in each area and the type of things that typically are in each area. So I'm actually going to raise you guys up a little bit here. You can see this map here is the map of Khorvaire. Like I said, this is my own personal map of Khorvaire. Eberron is my favorite setting. Each and every section on that map that is labeled, somebody has pre-planned what is in that area. So for example, if my players are traveling across the Talenta Plains, I know that they're going to be running into a few dinosaurs over there, and also a lot of halflings, because that's halfling territory, and so I can use that to set up my encounters. You can do easy things like bandits and wolves and things like that, but you also want to look at what's in the area. If they're traveling through a mountain range, there's a possibility they can run into rocks or aarakocras or other mountainous creatures. If they're traveling underground, then they will probably run into some slimes, maybe a couple of mimics, some skeletons, etc., etc. You want to make sure that everything is appropriate for the area. You don't want to be throwing a fucking green dragon at your players while they're traveling across a plain field or something like that, right? You want to make sure that everything fits so that so that everything is right with the world, and the world feels more immersive. Unless the entire point of your campaign setting is that shit's gone wacky, yo. But that's not what we're really talking about today. Next up, you want to assign numbers to each of the encounters. This was the rolling table that I was talking about earlier. You want to make sure that each of the encounters has a specific number, because you're going to have your players roll for the encounters. Now, the reason that I prefer encounter tables over outright planning every single encounter for every single day is because it can feel a little bit more organic that way. While you are welcome to set up every single day of travel and say, okay, on this day they're going to run into a bandit camp, this day they're going to run into a traveling merchant, this day they're going to find some buried treasure, this day they're going to find an injured owlbear, you know, so on and so forth. While you could probably do that, it is never going to feel as good or as organic as having them roll for it, because the randomness of the roll is what creates the day-to-day life of the world. Each day will feel different and unique because of the rolls that you are putting forward when it comes to this. With that being said, let's go ahead and jump over to this example table that I set up right before I started filming the video. So as you can see, all of our things that I talked about earlier are in this section. I have a forest traversal path that I know they're going to be going through. So I know I can do things like sprites and trents and elves and bandits and owlbears and more. I know that they're going to be traveling for 4 days. So I set up an encounter table with 6 on the encounter table. Now, the thing that we're going to do next is, before the session, we're going to have the players roll each day. So you don't want to, this is something I used to do, but you don't want to do that. You do not want the players to roll from day to day, right? Like you finish the first day, and then you have the players roll the morning of the next day to see what happens. Don't do that. Instead, when the session starts, look at your players and see how many players you have, and then pick an order. So for me, example, I just go alphabetically. So I have 3 players in my campaign. I have Fluffle, I have Eli, and I have another player named Ambrosia. And in alphabetical order in the Discord, they show up as Fluffle, then Eli, and then Ambrosia. And so I just have Fluffle roll. So for a 4-day travel, I'll have Fluffle roll twice, because Fluffle is going to be day number 1 and day number 4. And then I'll have Eli roll once, and I'll have Ambrosia roll once. Those go, Eli is day number 2, and Ambrosia is day number 3. So if we were to do Fluffle's roll, Fluffle would roll a 3. So on the very first day, nothing eventful would happen. Now, something that I like to do is I like to color code the days. So the very first day is day number 3. So then the second roll that Fluffle ends up doing is going to be a 6. So I'm going to come over here to the 6. I'm going to mark this as day 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. That means it's going to be in green. That tells me that that is what's happening on day 4. So then Eli is going to roll. Eli for day 2 rolls a 1. So the 1 is this forest sprite over here. So we're going to come over, and day 2 rolled a 1. So that's where that is. And then finally, Ambrosia rolls day 3, which ends up being a 5. So we come over here, we highlight this, and 1, 2, 3. Day 3 is yellow. So we have day 1, day 2, day 3, and day 4. I understand not highlighting this yellow because it can get confusing. So you might choose blue or something like that. It just depends on how you color code your days. Those were just example colors. Another thing that you can do is just kind of write down. So Fluffle rolled a 3 and a 6. So day 1 is number 3, and then day 2 is number 1, and then day 3, this gets confusing sometimes, is number 5, and then day 4 is number 6. Right? So you might do something like that, might write them down, or you can color code them, whichever one you want to do, whichever one is easier on you. And then let's take a look at the type of encounters that we have. So I'm going to go ahead and change these all back to black, make it a little bit easier on us. So I have a forest sprite attempting to get some water from a spring. They might not fight this forest sprite. But they might help the sprite get the water from the spring, and then depending on what happens, maybe the sprite blesses them with something like temporary HP that lasts until it gets taken away, right? So maybe they all get like 5 temp HP, or maybe they get a canteen of the spring water, and the spring water has some sort of disease cleansing properties. Something simple like that, helping the sprite can very well do something for them. Then we have a bandit camp. A bandit camp is a very simple combat encounter, 5 to 6 bandits sitting around a campfire, chilling, having lunch. Whatever the case may be, maybe they're sleeping, they come across it later in the evening. That's something else you can do with traveling, is trying to decide, at what point in the day. Do they come across it in the morning? Do they come across it in the afternoon? Do they come across it in the evening? One really common encounter, or not common encounter, but one kind of fun encounter is night hags. You can put night hags on the day roll encounter chart, and that way it's the night of that day that they introduce the encounter. Then we have nothing eventful. I like to always put at least one nothing eventful day in the rolling table, because this provides the players an opportunity to have some very heavy roleplay moments without the pressure of whatever you're putting in front of them, leading them toward all of these things. Next up, number 4, we have an injured woman. This doesn't even have to be like this 4 sprite where they get a reward. Perhaps it could just be an opportunity for your players to showcase how they would react in certain situations. It's a very, very good thing to try to do. And I really enjoy doing this kind of thing as well. I think that, very simplistic moments that kind of help flesh the characters out and show the kind of person that the characters are is something that's very important to the role-playing experience. Then, and this is a personal favorite of mine, I actually yoinked this kind of thing from Skyrim. There's a couple of Easter eggs in Skyrim, not Easter eggs, but like lore bits that make the world feel a little bit more alive and lived in. And there's something like this in Skyrim. So they find a small chest half buried beneath a tree containing 5 silver, a pearl necklace, and a love letter written to someone named Sasha. Basically, what this does is it creates a miniature story element inside of the world. The players discover that some man fell in love with a woman named Sasha, and he buried the 5 silver and a pearl necklace, which was all of his life savings and a gift that he was going to give to her in order to win her love over. And you might even do something like have a skeleton nearby, which would be the remains of the person that wrote the letter. Maybe he saw Sasha marry someone else, and it kind of killed him inside, and he took his own life in this area. Or maybe he buried this in order to come back to get it later after he had come back from a war so that he could bring it to Sasha. Maybe the players actually take this and see if they can find Sasha to give her this last letter and this last gift from her lover. It could be a miniature quest, or again, it's just something to open up the world. And finally, and this is actually something that I used in my campaign in my last session, a mama owlbear and her cubs. Maybe the players come across an owlbear that's a little bit too hostile, and once they figure out what's happening with it, they realize that it was just protecting their cubs. This is a great way, again, to make the world feel alive. You'll notice throughout this entire encounter table, I only have one pure combat encounter, with everything else kind of being world-building techniques. That's something that you need to remember whenever you are trying to give your players a travel session, is that most encounters should not be combat. Most of them should be world-building. There could be combat in a few of them. They might fight the owlbear because of how hostile it is without realizing it had cubs. But if they do, that can also lead to them trying to figure out what to do with the cubs. Something to think about. And that's all I have for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed this little session of DM tips. Please let me know what you think down below. I love you guys so much, and I will see you in the next one.